Hi, my name is Kathy Fitzgerald, and I am a parent professional working in the developmental disabilities field. Today, in this section, Section C, we're going to be talking about the flow of paperwork from selection of service for the waiver all the way to developing and how that plan of care sort of happens. So, thinking about it from that perspective, let's say that you're a family and you filled out all of your paperwork and your waitlist assessment criteria has been sent in, and that final door where the state is actually funding to remove people from the wait list. So you will receive a letter from the state telling you that your son or daughter has been selected for comprehensive services, which means you've got the waiver. That's very good. It will also include there a list of the provider agencies and care coordinators, independent care coordinators that you must select from. So you have a limited amount of time, I believe it's 30 days, to respond to the state that says, yes, we still want this Medicaid waiver, and give them the name of the care coordinator that you've selected to help you develop your plan of care. First thing as a family that you're going to need to do is think about who you would want to be your care coordinator. And care coordinator is a very important individual. They're people who have to have a really good set of varying skill types. So they need to be able to work well with families and to be able to interview and draw from you the kinds of supports and services that would really make a difference for your son or daughter. They need to be really good detail people because they have to write these plans of care, and so that means they have to be a good writer. They have to know detail. And then finally, they really need to know the community. They need to know what are the resources out there, what kinds of things, not just paid services, but what kinds of community supports and services are out there that will add quality of life and education and opportunities for your son or daughter. So my advice to families is to ask other families to check around and to interview care coordinators to make sure that it's a good fit. Once you've decided on your care coordinator, you need to think about who do you want to provide service. Many communities have more than one DD agency that can provide services. So again, I would talk with other families. For example, when we chose our agency, I wanted an agency that had strong family values, that had a good reputation, that were good communicators, that if I phoned that I would get a call back right away, or at least in a reasonable amount of time. So thinking about the things that you would anticipate wanting from your agency is important, and then doing that interview and following through, because these are people that you're going to be working with over a long period of time. But don't stress, because did you know that if you're finding, even if you have a really good care coordinator, that for some reason you're not communicating well or you just don't match, some people you match with better than others, you can always change care coordinators, and you can always change service agencies. I would caution families not to be hopping back and forth doing a lot of that. Don't do that lightly. But if you really have concerns, then know that it is your right to change both the care coordinator and the service provider agency that you're working with. It's also important to know that you can have a primary service agency that can be developing your waiver, but you can have a different agency that might do employment, for example, or a different agency that does just recreation. So you aren't limited to only one agency, although you typically have one agency that works with your care coordinator to pull all of that information together. So be aware, it's not life or death. You can always change things, but it is important to know that um, uh, you don't do something like that lightly, but you can do it when you need to. So once you've made that determination for your care coordinator then takes over uh, in respect to making sure that she's pulling all of the necessary paperwork that has to go into SDS in order to finalize your Medicaid waiver. And the big piece that she'll have to fill out, or you'll have to help her fill out, is to complete that Medicaid financial eligibility. So any records that you have of if your child, son or daughter, has a bank account, making sure that all of that paperwork has been submitted to the care coordinator so she can get that in, as well as any medical records, the developmental disability determination, which really is the same as Social Security. So she'll be working on all of that in the background as you're thinking about the kinds of services and support. Then she's going to be helping to organize um, the level of care determination, which again is that inventory of client and assessment planning. So she'll be setting up with the state assessor who is going to be interviewed. So you'll need to let the care coordinator know whether you or your another family member is going to be uh, the primary family person responding, and then you'll want two other people. I always recommend, if your son or daughter is younger, you're looking at school personnel who spent a lot of time and know your child well, or the respite provider, or your next door neighbor, or an aunt and uncle, but somebody who really knows your individual quite well. That's who you want to have interviewed. The next step is developing the plan of care. So the care coordinator is going to help you determine who you would like to be part of the planning team. If there's an aunt or an uncle, husband, neighbor, friend that you think could contribute, she's going to help you coordinate and pull all of those individuals together. And you're going to sit down and think about the kind of future long term that you would like to see, and then you're going to think about in a 12-month period, because that's what each uh, plan of care is for. Uh, what are the things necessary and important for them to do, learn, and know this year, so that eventually you're working to promote productivity and independence and self-sufficiency as much as possible? You'll want to incorporate in that plan of care anything that you can anticipate you're going to be needing for the next year in the way of specialized medical equipment, for example, wheelchairs, any pending medical procedures or things that need to happen. You need to talk about uh, and make note of in the plan of care. The care coordinator will need to write that down. uh, it doesn't have to be approved. For example, if you need a Hoyer lift or you need a new wheelchair, specialized wheelchair, you don't have to have it approved when the plan of care goes in, that particular specialty equipment. But you do need to let them know that you're going to be asking for that within the next year, just so that they can be planning and be mindful of expenditures that may be coming up. You'll need a prescription for any medical specialty stuff. A part of accessing that specialized medical equipment, of course, is to have a prescription from your physician or therapist stating that you need that particular item or service. Once your plan of care is completed and all written and all services have been requested, then your care coordinator will submit that to SDS for approval. And hopefully, if it's approved, uh, you'll be assigned a number from Medicaid that will allow your agency and care coordinator to bill and make that service happen. It's important to note later in the training, we'll be talking about what happens if it's not approved or parts of it are not approved. Finally, after all of this has been done and you've gotten the approval back from SDS, um, services can begin. But I want to caution folks to know that it's going to take a while, even once that plan of care has been approved, because now the hard work begins. You have to find that right person to work with your son or daughter, and they have to be trained and on the specifics of what your child needs and their plan of care. So be patient, know that it's coming, and once it begins, you'll be very, very happy. One of the things that you can request of your agency is a cost utilization sheet. It's an important piece of paper because it helps you keep track of the amount of services and hours that have been received or delivered already in the year. And it helps you plan if you've got family or friends coming and you want to set aside some extra time for respite, for example, or whatever. Then you know how many units you have. And it also helps you be more accountable for the services that are being delivered because those services cost the state money, and you want to make sure that they're actually being utilized and billed. So, as families, I want you to be aware of what happens at 18 because life really changes at 18. As a parent, you're no longer financially really responsible for the individual. They are considered an adult. You uh, don't have access to their private records or their medical records or can't make those kinds of determination unless you have thought about something called guardianship or limited guardianship or conservatorship. Um, so, thinking and planning ahead for that transition from adolescence into adulthood for your son or daughter with a disability is really critical. You want to think about Social Security. Have you applied or have they applied for Social Security? Because Medicaid waivers do not pay for room and board. So if your son or daughter plans to live as independently as possible in the home of their choosing, then they're going to need a way to pay for that. And Social Security is how that happens, primarily for people with disabilities. Um, and making sure that you apply for public assistance. It used to be in the state of Alaska that once you applied for Social Security and signed up, you were automatically signed up for public assistance. But that doesn't happen anymore. The state of Alaska is a wonderful place in that they supplement for individuals what they consider survival amount or living amount. So that includes adult public assistance. So you'll want to make sure, again, that you've applied for both of those things prior to them turning 18 because it can take a little while for Social Security and public assistance to go through. Be aware that Social Security can be denied uh, the first time around and often is. So I encourage families to keep track of all of their records and when they submit to Social Security that they turn in everything that has to do with functionality, diagnosis, anything that can support that the individual really does need Social Security um, so that hopefully it won't be denied the first time. And then again, thinking about guardianship or conservatorship or limited guardianship, there's a whole array of those kinds of services. So if you have a son or daughter who you know is very financially vulnerable to their friends, you'll want to make sure that you've thought about how do you keep them safe in that regard so that they're not taken advantage of. And that process is really a pretty nice, easy process. I believe the charge is now $75 to fill out the paperwork that, at your courthouse, your local courthouse. And the court will then appoint a court visitor to come and interview you and your son or daughter and other people who know them to make sure that they do in fact need a guardian or conservatorship, and then they make that recommendation back to the courts, and then the court will uh, appoint you as guardian, or if there's not a family member involved, a, a guardian ad litem. But those are important steps to remember. Thanks for joining us for this flow, if you would, or paper trail for how the Medicaid waiver happens. So the next section is Section D, developing the plan of care and looking at the types and services that are available under the Medicaid waiver.